Hi, I'm Chad Hennings, and welcome to Forces of Character podcast. I'm excited today. I'm always excited for everyone, but I've got a great personal friend that's joining us today, Joe Croce. And if you've ever been to a Cici's Pizza, you're going to appreciate this interview because Joe's the founder of Cici's Pizza. We're going to learn more about his journey from taking it from one store to a franchise to hundreds of stores throughout the country, and just what that took, the character, the tenacity, the resiliency, all those different character traits. So I know you don't want to necessarily just listen to me speak all the time. I want to bring my friend Joe in. Joe, bud, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Chad. It's great to be here, buddy.
Well, I appreciate your time. And, as all of our guests, we kind of start off with what made Joe Joe? Who made Joe Joe? So let's go back to start, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Early influences, etc.
Okay. Well, first, if I might, to all your listeners out there, I think it's important that people recognize the kind of person that you are. We've known each other for 30 years. And just to everyone out there, I want you to know that this man, Chad Hennings, is exactly the same person away from the mic as he is in front of the mic. He's as genuine and as transparent a person as I've ever met. So thank you for having me. Hopefully I didn't embarrass you, but I needed to get that out.
You did. Thanks, bud. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I was the oldest of 6 children. It was a neighborhood where I'll call it working class. But we didn't have social media back then. We didn't know what we didn't have. And so my very early years, up until about 8 years old, it was just a blast. I mean, we had hundreds of people playing in the streets all the time. You didn't worry about your kids being kidnapped if you were parents, so we were out late at night. It was a great experience. And in terms of early influences, it would have to have started with my dad. The word perseverance comes to mind because this was a man whose father ran away from their home when my dad was 2 years old. So my dad grew up without a father. And back then, the Italian heritage, divorce was just absolutely unknown. Nobody, if you were from a divorced home back then, you were the only kid on the entire block who was from a divorced home. And there was a lot of shame that went with that, and he had to deal with all of that and persevere in his early life with all of that. And I remember that made an impression upon me because he would share that with me. And he because we had 6 kids, he was working all the time, and even though he was working all the time, he was going to night school to further himself. And I'd come home I'd come downstairs Saturday mornings, and there he was working really hard Saturday morning, Saturday night, every night off to school, just was trying to do everything he could to better himself. And my mother was the love of his life. They truly had a wonderful relationship and truly so deeply in love. And at 8 years old, my mom passed away. And my dad was suddenly in the middle of having to raise 6 children, the oldest one being 8, okay? The youngest having just been born. And it wasn't like he could just take time off and raise 6 kids. He had to continue to go to work. He had to raise 6 children, not having ever had a father, really having no direction whatsoever about what to do. I can only imagine what he was dealing with, and how he persevered through all of that helped me so much, because after my mom died, those first few years, unbeknownst to my dad, of course, those first few years in the house with caretakers coming in and taking care of us, there were some really horrible things that happened. And I remember even at 8 years old thinking, I looked to my dad. I would say to myself, my dad went through so much. I can get through this. I can come out on the other side. And I think it was only his perseverance, that model for me, that got me through that. And, you know, all of us have either been through something, going through something, or about to go through something. And I think perseverance is such a big part of character. Second thing that my dad did for me was he grew up during the Depression, and I remember he was always so thankful for everything. The smallest of things he was so thankful for. And that left such an impression with me. And I know we're going to talk about high school in a minute, but where I went to high school, it was a boarding school. And the dorm room was 18 kids with cinder block walls. You had a cot. It was a bunk bed, so we had 9 bunk beds. You had a cot, and you had what's called a foot locker, which, as you know, is really just a piece of luggage under your bed. One window in the room. The heat worked about 20% of the time. This was in Long Island, in New York. So the winters, it was just pretty cold. And
So was this a military school?
this was a military school.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
I remember, don't want to get too graphic here, but just to paint a picture for your audience, we had brooms in the room so that we could swat at the rats and throw them out the window. And with all of that, I was still so happy to be alive. And that came from my dad, just recognizing there's happiness in anything. And I mentioned high school. My dad had the brilliant idea of sending me to military school because he thought it would be a better option than the local public schools in Brooklyn. And he was probably right. But what we didn't know was that military school had some state funding. And that state funding allowed the courts to send wayward youngsters to that school. So basically, it was a glorified juvenile detention center. And there were some, I think, really two things that really impacted me in high school. The first was, as I said, it was a military school. It was in this dilapidated castle up on a hill on Long Island. Picture 800 knuckleheads in this dilapidated building on top of a hill, surrounded by one of the most exclusive areas of Long Island. Needless to say, most of the residents, they didn't want us there. They were petitioning all the time to get the school closed because it was bringing down their property values. Here was this beautiful area with a golf course and everything else, and you had this dilapidated building sitting on top of the hill. And how that played out for us was every Friday we got to go home. We got to go back to Brooklyn, and we'd have to take the Long Island Railroad to get from Long Island back to Brooklyn. And to do that, we had to walk through the streets of the neighborhood to get to the Long Island Railroad. And when we did that, and again, I started at the school in the 8th grade. When we did that, we were barraged with people from their porches, from their windows, telling us that we're the scum of the earth, telling us that we're never going to be anything, telling us to get out of their neighborhood, telling us that our parents are a bunch of thugs to have raised such a bunch of thugs. And when you hear this, and you hear it just about every weekend going home, it impacts you. It impacts you. I saw what it did to people around me, how it basically helped to break them. But what I got from that, from a character standpoint, what I got from that was a recognition that I'm never going to be that. I'm never going to be that kind of person. I'm going to be the kind of person that treats everybody equally. I will never use my mouth as a stun gun of discouragement to people. I wanted to spend my life encouraging people. And so that was, in the midst of all of that, something very positive came out of that. Second thing that came out of high school was, so much of what you talk about is character. Well, you can't have character if you hang around characters. And because the makeup of that school, it was impossible to find a friend group that could be a positive influence on you. So I went into the school, a pretty decent kid. And by the time I came out 5 years later, I was smoking weed, I was stealing, I was cutting class. As much as I tried to ward off that kind of element, it just slowly seeped into my system. It's like a flu bug almost. If you're around it long enough, you're going to catch it. And I just recognized after that if I ever wanted to be the kind of person that I thought I could be, I needed to surround myself with people that were that had those same qualities. And that was a huge lesson for me, thank God, early enough, because if not, I would have continued along that path with those people and wound up in jail or dead.
That kind of reminds me of a quote by Machiavelli that the best indication of any man's character is by the company in which he keeps. Your relationships matter. But Joe, you've hit on several great points regarding, coming up, the lessons learned from your father, resiliency, gratitude, attitude. But how did you deal with that negativity from those people? Did you, positive self-talk, did you internalize that? How did that impact who you determined who you would be? I know you said that you were never going to speak ill will of others, but that constant derogatory language, eventually will break a person down where they kind of give up. Did you kind of say, that's not me, that's not who I am?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it did, as I said earlier, it did break so many of the people that I went to school with. But what I did, and you having been an athlete can appreciate this, you hear different athletes sometimes being interviewed, and they talk about the chip that they have. They're asked, what motivates you? Why can you do this? Because I have such a chip about not getting drafted by this team or getting cut by this team. I had a chip on my shoulder that resonated so intensely with me about I am going to be better than that. I am going to be better than that. And the way I defined better was not screaming at some young kid about how he's the worst thing in the world. I had that chip, and that chip can create so much energy. If you can channel that chip in the right direction, what I call a positive rebel, if you can channel it in the right direction, there's a whole lot of mileage that you can get from that can really, if I'm being honest with myself, I probably still have that chip. Here, I'm 66 years old. When I walked those streets, I was 13 years old. Here we are 53 years later, and I still have that chip, that desire to not be what those people were.
Yeah, so you took that desire, that tenacity, that grit, determination. Obviously, you played football in high school. So tell me about the journey. How'd you make it to SMU and to Dallas?
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, Chad, because it surely wasn't my size that helped me excel on the football field. I was a little heavier then, but I was still the same height. I was tenacious. I was violent. I needed football as an outlet for all of that aggressiveness, all of that violence that I had inside of me. So many times I hear people talk about the negative side of athletics, where someone will go to college and they'll get a football scholarship and they'll get out and they didn't get the their degree and, they're working in some job that doesn't require a degree. My response to those people so often is, do you realize where that young man would have been if he hadn't played football? Even though he didn't get his degree, that gave him an opportunity to be exposed to a way of life, a campus of life that it was so far away from what he had grown up with. He learned life lessons in football that carried him the rest of his life. You don't have to be a Harvard MBA professor to have been a success in college as far as football is concerned. But going back to your question about SMU, my dad's brother, my uncle, lived in Houston, and they talked about SMU all the time, about what a great school it was, and it was a great accounting program. And my dad pretty much had me pegged as one day to be an accountant. And I didn't really stand in the way of that because I was young and you didn't really talk back or stand up to your dad in those days. So I kind of went along, and he said, "You're going to SMU." Well, that was that. The end of recruiting visits, I was going to SMU. And so I went to SMU, and even before my football experience, if I could, what startled me about SMU was I had never been around so much wealth in my life. As most of your audience knows, SMU is in Highland Park, one of the most exclusive suburbs, in the US. And I was amazed at the kind of wealth in the student body. I was also amazed about the lack of violence. My entire life had been in areas and in schools where violence was normalized. And so here I was in a nonviolent environment with wealthy people. I was intimidated, I was overwhelmed, I was unbelievably uncomfortable. And I really thought about running at that point. I really did. I said, this is just not me. This is so far out of my comfort zone. I don't think I can do this. But again, that perseverance raised its head that my dad had instilled in me. And I said, you know what? I thought to myself, those kids are going to get the same textbooks that I'm going to get in class. They're going to have the same professor. I'm going to have the very same opportunity they're going to have to be successful academically. I'm going to do this. And so my uncomfortableness is something that drove me to success in the classroom. It was truly a turning point for me. As far as football, that was also a turning point for me because
I just want to say, one point to really hit home on that is a lot of times parents don't want their children to experience struggle, to have to go experience fear, to obstacles in life. They want to pave the way for them. And as I'm listening to you and to your story, it's the aspect of you facing your fears, overcoming those obstacles with that tenacity and that grit, and it's made you who you eventually as you're growing into this adult, this person who you're called to be. I just want for the listeners to hear that if you're going through something, it's face that fear, grit, determination. Continue to pursue that with excellence. But I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's just a great point that I want to continue to. As I'm listening to your story, it keeps that theme keeps rising time and time again, and I want to hear about football.
Yeah, but to pick up on the point you just made, Chad, and I'm sure you can appreciate this as a parent, and I'm sure the parents out in the audience can appreciate this. We want our kids to have it better than us. We want them to not struggle as much as us because we think in some way a little bit less struggle will create just a better life for them. And it's such a balancing act to throw them between throwing them to the wolves and being that helicopter parent. That middle ground, I think, is something, as a society, I think we're struggling with it.
Yeah, very much so.
Very much so. I mean, when I was a kid and I was on the basketball court, if I committed a foul and a coach yelled at me, my first thought was, my dad's going to be upset at me for doing something stupid, right? Now, when a coach yells at a player, a parent yells at the coach, don't yell at my son, or don't yell at my daughter. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
So to the point where there needs to be balance.
Right.
But back to football. So I had only been to Dallas once before summer football practice was held. And that was at a recruiting visit, probably October, November, December, probably November of my senior year in college or in high school. So I had no idea how hot it was, right? So here we go, right, in August. And this was the first year of this head coach's tenure. And he was there to make a statement in a huge way. And I'll never forget the first practice. We took a knee in front of him, and there was an ambulance out there. And he said, gentlemen, we are going to stay out here until 3 people quit. And I said to him, and he said, there's 1 ambulance there. If we need to call more ambulances, we're calling them. And I thought, okay, here we go. They didn't really talk about this during the recruiting visit. And I'll never forget that practice. He ran us, and this was full pads, ran us. And about halfway through practice, I put my hands on my knees and said to myself, if I can get through this, the rest of my life is gravy. I knew I would never, ever have to endure what I was enduring out there. And there was also the expectation, and you can't do this now, but back then we had 3-a-days. Not 1-a-days, not 2-a-days, 3-a-days. Full pads, 3-a-days. And so that was the first practice of the day, knowing that there were 2 more coming. And what it did for me at that moment was recognize that I am capable of so much more than I thought I could ever endure. And that was a life lesson that helped me every time I was in a meeting later in life and the meeting was going 4 or 5 hours, whatever, I was hanging in there. I was there because I remember that football practice and said, this is nothing compared to what I went through out on that football field. So it taught me that pretty much anything is possible.
That's awesome.
Anything's possible.
So that's kind of like Bear Bryant Junction Boys 2.0. There
Yes,
we go.
exactly.
There we go. Now you're back at school, you get a degree and you're going into your first job experience. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of talk about that. What was your first job that you got out of college?
Okay. As I said a little earlier, I received an accounting degree. And this was the first time in my life that I was pursuing something that I didn't want to do. All my life I had played football. I wanted to play football. I went to school. I wanted to go to school because you had to go to school to play football. So my entire life up until the age of 21 was basically something that I was motivated, incentivized, really excited to do. Well, I got my accounting degree. I went to work for, now it's called the Big 4 accounting firms. Back then it was the Big 8. So I went to work for one of the Big 8 firms, and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I just, we'd work Monday through Friday, Saturday night around 5 o'clock, I'd start being depressed about having to go to work on Monday morning. It was, even though I was good with numbers, and a lot of people say, well, whatever you're good at, that's what you'll be passionate about. I don't agree with that. I was good with numbers, but I hated what I was doing. And I really, really couldn't feel good about being a part of those kinds of organizations, because there was a lot of backstabbing. There was a lot of every man or woman for themselves. There was a lot of extramarital affairs going on, older managers, partners preying on these first-year female employees that were so vulnerable. I just knew there had to be something better than that. And I remember one Saturday night on the couch brooding about having to go to work. And suddenly, as I was laying there, I said, I want to get in the pizza business. And I literally jumped off the couch and hollered, yes. And that, now, when I let my dad know, when I let the people that I was working with know, everybody thought that I was a lunatic. Everybody was like, you're giving up this professional career to go and make pizzas? Because back then, the pizza industry was not looked upon as a professional environment. It was looked upon as non-skilled labor, and how could you possibly give up a professional career for that?
Did you have any background in pizza? Growing up working in restaurants or anything like that?
In New York, in Brooklyn, when I would walk in to pizza restaurants, I was mesmerized. The smell, the taste of the product, the men flipping the pizza up in the air, the theatrics of it, it always brightened my day. That was my experience with it, and it's an experience. In college, one summer, I did work for a pizza restaurant, and this kind of reinforced why I thought I could do well, because this guy had like 20 restaurants around town, and he was doing it all wrong, just all wrong. And I said, if I can just do it a little bit right, not even a lot right, just a little bit right, I've got a real shot. And so, needless to say, I was met with a lot of resistance from my dad. My dad didn't talk to me for 2 years because he was so hurt that I was giving up this profession that he had worked hard for his whole life to provide for me. And he didn't talk to me for 2 years. And that was hard. That was really hard. But I knew that I had to pursue something that I loved. I'm a passionate guy, and I couldn't spend my entire work life in an environment where I was just depressed. So that was the impetus for why I decided to get into the pizza business.
So talk about the early years of starting that. How did it start off? It wasn't Cece's right out of the box, I'm assuming.
No. Well, right before Cece's was me giving up my job as an accountant and saying, okay, I still got to pay the rent, while I learn this business, because I felt like I needed to learn the business. While I learn this business, I still have to have some income to pay for my apartment, pay for my car. So I was a graveyard cook at Denny's from 11 to 7 in the morning. And then I slept from 7 to 3, and then went and worked for what I thought was a really good pizza restaurant in town to learn the business. And I did that for 6 months. And as I was doing that, I was trying to raise the money to open a restaurant. And I remember going to almost hundreds of banks, and everybody looking at me like, you're a 23-year-old kid, you don't have any money, you don't have any collateral, get out of here. And so doors just slam in my face again and again and again. But again, that perseverance, I never once, Chad, thought about, well, maybe I need to go back to accounting, or maybe I need to just get a little bit more realistic about what I'm going to do in life. I knew that I was going to make this happen. And there was a gentleman, Mike Cole, who used to come into the pizza restaurant that I worked at. And he said, you know what? If you ever want to open your own restaurant, come and talk to me. I'll bankroll you. And I was like, yeah. You know, a lot of people said that, and I just kind of blew it off. But after the hundreds of banks that said no, I said, you know what? Maybe I'll give Mike a call. So I called Mike. He put in 10,000. I put in 10,000. We got a $130,000 bank loan, and the first CC's was born.
Wow. What year was this?
That was 1985 in Plano, Texas. And back then, Plano, it's not the booming metropolis it is right now. It was a little bedroom community. We started off 1,200 square feet, nothing but takeout. That's all it was. Kind of like a Little Caesars, if you will. So all we were was takeout. And it was just such a glorious time for me, because I remember being behind the counter. I remember people coming in and me saying to myself, they're here because they want our pizza. There was so much satisfaction that came with that, along with recognizing I'm not working. Work, jail was what I did before. This is freedom. So I worked from literally 9 in the morning till 11 at night, 7 days a week for a year and a half. No managers, just me and the staff, so that we could pay off the loan in 1 year. And we paid the loan off in 1 year. And the lesson there early on was live way below your means. I had a $400 apartment. I had a $200 car payment. And I spent $100 a month on food. So I lived on $700 a month, about it came to about $9,000 a year, because I wanted to put everything back in the business. And it was just so much fun, just constantly trying to get better. The community loved us because we were the underdog. We were just a one-store, mom and pop kind of a place. And the friends that I made, the relationships that came from that were just amazing. And we did it so unconventionally. I remember after about a year and a half, I got another car, and it was a Corvette. I wanted to celebrate that we just paid off the restaurant, so I got it was a lease, but I got a Corvette. And I remember we had the kind of restaurant where when people came in, they said, "Is that your car?" And I said, "Yeah, I just got it." They were happy for me. And I'd throw them the keys, and they'd go driving around the parking lot. And that's the kind of relationship I had with my guests. My guests were like family to me, because at the time, that was my entire life. CC's was my entire life. So my staff and my guests, I considered them family. And so that was the first restaurant, and it did really well, just with the concept of takeout. We went ahead and opened the second restaurant, and that was going to be a sit-down restaurant. And at the time, I thought, everybody was going the delivery route. Pizza Hut, Domino's, everybody was delivery. There really wasn't any sit-down restaurant. So I said, we're going to build a sit-down restaurant. And okay, well, we're going to build a sit-down restaurant. What do we need to do to get people in? We're going to have a buffet. Well, turns out the location that we signed the lease on, the landlord had told us the space next to us was going to be a furniture store, and it was a big footprint. This furniture store. We said, oh, okay, that won't hurt us. That's fine. Well, it turns out he kind of fibbed. It was a country and western bar that was going in there, and if you know anything about bars, on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, parking lots are packed. There was nowhere for us, for our guests, to park. So we couldn't get people into the restaurant. And so here we were with this huge facility saying, how in the world are we going to make this work? And there was a story when I was in the 70s, growing up in Brooklyn, there was a place called Crazy Eddie's, and he sold stereos. And he sold stereos for way less than what everybody else sold stereos. And the ad was, Crazy Eddie's, come in, our prices are insane. I mean, literally, the guy was just a lunatic, but it worked. And I said, you know what? We're going to be a little crazy here. We're going to sell for lunch, because we can't get people in at night. We got to find a way for people to come in for lunch. We're going to sell a 99-cent buffet. All you can eat, 99 cents. People again thought we were nuts. And people came in just out of pure curiosity of, how can you have an all you can eat for 99 cents? Well, thank God people would buy a drink and there was some margin there. And that was the beginning of the buffet. And we grew it from there. Every 3 months, we would go up a dime. So in 3 months, we went from 99 cents to $1.09. So every 3 months, so at the end of a year, we were up 40 cents. Well, that's 40%. Even though it's 99 cents to 140, it was margin. It was all margin that dropped to the bottom line. And people thought it was crazy. When I said, well, we had to go up a dime, they'd throw $2 at us and say, here, take $2 or whatever. So it was a running joke when we would go up on our prices. But what came from that was just, you got to be a little bit crazy sometimes. You got to throw in all the chips sometimes. To make things work. And that's what we did with that second store.
At what point in time then did that light bulb go off and say, now I can take this to a franchise?
Yeah. Well, we were doing really well with that restaurant. And I knew me well enough where the concept was such where I really believed at the time that an owner could really only run one store because it was so intensive. Our volume was so high that I really believed the key to success was to have owner-operators in the store. So I had to know that one store could afford someone a house in the suburbs, private school for their kids if they wanted, nice cars, money for retirement, money to put away for college. And until we could get to that financial model, I wasn't comfortable with franchising. For me, it wasn't, well, let's just get a royalty from them and let them figure out how to make money. I truly wanted to make sure that they could be successful. So as the second restaurant continued to evolve financially, I felt pretty good about franchising. And then, it's funny how the Lord works. Timing is pretty amazing. A young man who played football at Texas A&M right about the time that I played came in and said, do you franchise? And I said, no, not yet. We're working on it. And he goes, I want to be your first franchisee. And his name was Mike Tolson. And Mike was as passionate as I was. He loved God way before I ever found God. He was already married at that age, already had 2 kids, but he was just, it was contagious what Mike gave off, his passion for the business. And back then we really didn't know too much about real estate. So he said, I live in Mesquite, I want to open in Mesquite. And so we found, and again, back then Mesquite was also a very small town. We found the worst location in the worst part of Mesquite, and that's where he opened. And he killed it, absolutely killed it. And he did things like, it's raining out, you just picked up your pizza, let me get you to your car, here I've got my umbrella, get under the umbrella, we'll bring you out. He would give away more free pizza than anyone I've ever seen. He would give away 20 free pizzas a night. 20. So imagine as a family, somebody saying to you, you know what, tonight it's on us. And he did that 20 times. And I said, Mike, that's a lot of free pizza. He goes, it's $20. That's all it was, because a pizza cost $1 to make. He says it's $20. Those people will come in forever after what I've done for them. And that's the kind of person he was. That guerrilla marketing made him so very effective. And that was the beginning of franchising.
You know, before we take our next break, I just want to talk about, with that aspect of franchise, your enthusiasm, Joe, it's contagious. I mean, you're motivating me. I want to put the chin strap back on, put the pads on, let's go, or go make pizzas and go sell pizzas. But it's contagious. I mean, your aspect of resiliency, you're talking about the grit, determination, passion to serve others, you know, serve your family, put out a great product, give of yourself, that positive self-talk all the time. How were you able to build that into a culture for CC's going on, where now the growth is starting to be astronomical?
Great question. Well, the first thing we knew was that we couldn't bring on people with resumes. We had to bring on people that were poor, smart, and hungry. Because resumes, you took a risk of someone who had a resume of having accomplished things because the people underneath them did everything and they got the credit. We recognized that we needed people that we knew were going to go in there, were going to grind it out every single day. Now, we had to prepare those people. So even as we got to 400 stores, all of the training occurred in our home market in Dallas. It was very expensive to fly everybody in and to stay in Dallas. But in my mind, no price was too high to pay to instill that cultural piece. So one thing was everybody trained in the home market. Everybody got to see how it was in the home market, where we started. Another, I think, really important piece was the training program itself was 3 to 6 months. Now, if you're someone with a family saying that I have to give up my income stream for 3 to 6 months, leave my job and go train for 3 to 6 months, that took a commitment beyond belief. And we knew that that's how long it took for people to really get the culture. So many franchises nowadays, you can train for 3 or 4 weeks and they turn you loose. You can't figure out where the bathroom is in 3 or 4 weeks, much less the culture and the inner workings of a company. So we knew we needed that time. That was of utmost importance. We also had very few layers of management. So everybody was able to touch everybody else. Even as we grew, there were very few layers. So there was an accountability up and down the line. There was a responsiveness. There was again, we go back to caring. One of the biggest parts of our culture was everybody is to be treated as someone you serve. You serve everybody, and you do it in an urgent fashion. I remember once a senior executive who came to us from a place where, you know, if you were a senior level executive, status was a big deal and everybody bowed down to you. Well, that person was rude to one of our busboys, a busboy. I brought him in and I said, you know, you can't do that. You just can't. You do it again, you're fired. And this was a key player. This was a key player. I said, no one has the right to treat anyone in a way that's subservient. And that was a big part of the culture. Everybody realized you're going to be treated as an equal. You're going to be listened to. You're going to be responded to. You're going to know every single person in the office had to go work in a restaurant for the first month that they were employed, first 4 weeks. Even if they were a bookkeeper, you're going in the restaurant for 4 weeks. We wanted everyone to appreciate the grind, the grit, the the effort that it took to make this thing go. And you know, our success wasn't based on what happened in the office. It was based on what happened in those restaurants. And I wanted everybody to understand that. So culturally, that was a piece of what we did.
Joe, you just got through sharing with us, you know, how you create in that culture. But the thing is, you built this up to 400 plus stores around the country. Mm-hmm. When did you know when was when to sell? Mm-hmm. When it was time to make that next transition in life?
Yeah. Well, around the time my kids were 6 and 3, I got on a flight in the morning. It was like a 4 a.m. flight to Washington, D.C. Got to Washington, had meetings, looked at real estate, did all that, flew back that night, got home, I don't know, midnight. And I remember on the plane, well, actually in the airport, waiting for the plane to come home, saying, you know, how often am I going to have to miss what's happening at home because of days like this? And, you know, having not really grown up with a mom because she passed away at 8, and my dad having to work all the time, something that was very important to me was to be there for my kids and my wife. And if I was really being honest with myself at the time, I was there for my kids, I was there for my wife, any activity, I was there, but I wasn't always present. I wasn't really dialed in. A lot of times I was thinking about, wow, that construction in Maryland, how is that going? And that franchisee in Tuscaloosa, how's he doing? And I knew I could be a better father and a better husband. And I knew that I had to make the move at that time. That was really the impetus for me saying it's time. My senior level guys were phenomenal. They could do it without me, I thought, at that point. So I thought it was time.
That's about the time where we first met, I think, that many years ago. But I know your faith was so important to you. And how much did your faith impact you in that aspect of wanting to be that husband, to be that father, to be present? Believe me, I think every guy out there can relate that you're present physically, but emotionally, you know, spiritually within that relationship with your wife, your kids. Many times you're absent thinking about what's going on at work.
Right.
But dabble into that aspect of faith. How important was that, and what impact did that have on that decision?
Well, I think we have to go all the way back to when I was a kid. When my mom died, my dad, without any ill intent, just said to me, God took her, to explain why my mom wasn't there. Well, I took that to mean that God stole my mom. And that stayed with me for a lot of years. And I went through the motions of being someone who had faith, but it really wasn't until my wife caught the spiritual life that she had that I started to recognize maybe there's something there. And because I had always believed I get to this level of success or this level of success, then I'm really going to be happy. And, you know, it was just a moving target, constantly moving target. And I never got there. And I saw the happiness, the joy, the peace that she was experiencing. And this probably happened about 3 or 4 years before I sold CC's. So my faith became paramount probably 3 or 4 years before I sold. What I knew about my faith was that I was called to serve. I knew I was called to serve. I knew it was in a capacity beyond CC's. And so it felt right the timing felt right. And again, I have to thank my wife. Without her, I would not have pursued Christ as as faithfully as I have.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, you know, you are the poster child as people look up to you for success. I want to give you a definition on kind of living that aspect of excellence. To me, I define excellence as having a clearly defined identity and then living each day with character and purpose, mission, intensity, intentionality, etc. So kind of based on that identity, who is Joe Croce?
Great question. I think if they had to put it on a tombstone, okay, if it had to be that abbreviated, it would be, I want people to shine. I want people to shine. I get no kick out of accolades. I really don't. I've always kept my guard up and tried to be the one to not ever get the accolades because I really didn't feel like I deserved it. I love, whether it was a franchisee, whether it was a team member, whether it was a teammate back when we played ball, whether it's my kids, I love for people to shine. I love being involved, participating in an opportunity for someone to live their dream. That is really what motivates me more than anything. I know there's a high school track where I live, and I'll go and I'll run around there on Saturdays sometimes, and there'll be kids out there training, and my wife won't walk with me anymore because she knows I'm going to go over there and I'm going to say, you know, hey, if you just sink your hips just a little bit this way, or if you just throw your head this way, it's going to be even a better route than what you ran. And, you know, most of the time the kids take it. Some of the times they think, who is this old man? It's an example of I have such a desire to pour into people. That's why something like this, this to me is not about Joe Croce talking to people. This is about hopefully someone somewhere getting something that's going to help them shine. That's how I define excellence.
That's awesome. And you know, we couldn't pick a better industry for you to shine in. I mean, service is a part, it's your spiritual gift, it's obvious. I mean, giving to others. Yeah. You know, you mentioned success too. If you kind of had, looking back on that, your life, and it's truly, it's kind of a Horatio Alger, rags to riches type story. If you had to go back and said, you know, very seldom do we get do-overs, but if you had to do that do-over in life, what would you have done differently during that time period?
It's a question, you know, and sometimes I hear people that get asked that question and they say, nah, wouldn't have done anything different. And I say, man, you know what? If you got a little older and you got a little wiser, there ought to be something. And for me, I would have, during my days at CC's, I would have smelled the roses just a bit more. I was so zoned in. I was so tuned in to what was happening all the time. I really couldn't appreciate what was happening around us. When we would go on the road with my management team, I had an opportunity to really have some fun with them. But most of the time I chose to let's talk strategy, let's talk planning. So I would have just enjoyed it just a little bit more. I would have sought out counsel to a much higher degree. I really didn't seek out counsel. And you know, Lord talks about pride comes before destruction. That may have been one of the reasons that I burned out, is I didn't seek out counsel. I didn't think anybody knew the business as well as the people within the framework of CC's. So when someone would say, hey, and at the time, I don't know, I was 40, and someone would say, hey, I've got a 55-year-old guy, 60-year-old guy that wants to come and talk to you about life. I was like, man, I don't have time for that. You know, I'm grinding away here. What can he tell me? That's an idiot attitude. And if I had to go back, I would have sought out counsel. I would have absolutely recognized that as much as I was able to impact people at CC's, I should have been more generous with my time outside of CC's. I had a phenomenal platform where I could have touched lives outside of CC's to a much higher degree. And I didn't do that. I felt like I was giving by giving all I could to the CC's family. And that was admirable, but there could have been more.
Well, in defense of that, though, one of the reasons why I met you too was your engagement with Ed Shipman at Happy Hill Farm back in the day that you did.
Yeah.
I mean, you were working towards that, so don't beat yourself up too much on that.
Yeah, but I know I could have done more. I know I could have done more. As an example, I'm working with the Gainesville State School, which is, you know, juvenile detention center. And when I go in there now, as a 66-year-old guy, you know, it takes a lot for those kids to tune in, 17, 18-year-old kid to tune into a 66-year-old. If I had been at CC's and gone into that kind of environment, I probably would have had a little bit more credibility. I probably wouldn't have had to work as hard to prove that, hey, you know, I can help you here. So those were something else that I learned was I thought that CC's couldn't do it without me. And it wasn't in a prideful sense. It was a sense of, I know I care so much about these people. No one is going to care the way I do. And that created such a burden on me that every single time something negative happened anywhere, no matter how small or how big, I took it on. I would, if I could go back, I would have dealt with that very differently, much more rationally.
Yeah. Well, you know, we talk about too that, you know, that living excellence, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
You're never quite there.
Right.
So if you had give advice now to, well, either to that young man, that young Joe starting off in the business, and you kind of alluded to that, but maybe there's a guy out there right now that's kind of in that transition. Maybe he sold his company. He's kind of at that aspect of life. There's got to be more to life than just working and making money. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give that individual that's in that transition period now?
Life's about purpose. And as I look back on CC's and all the joy that I got from CC's, if you dial it all down, there was a sense of purpose. And I think if you make that transition thinking, okay, my purpose is going to be to volunteer and to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, well, you get what you get in life. If you're not going to approach it in the same way you approached your business, with the same excitement, the same motivation, the same desire to be successful in that volunteer role, it won't be anything that's fulfilling. So I would encourage people that whatever you pursue, whatever purpose you have after your business life, make sure you approach it with the same zest, because that is the only way you will be fulfilled.
That's a mic drop moment. I appreciate Joe. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate
thank you, Chad.
the wisdom. I mean, I've learned a lot here too, so I appreciate you. And if you like this podcast, follow us on social media. And if you want to find out more about Force of Character podcast, go to my website, chadhennings.com. Thank you for listening in. Take care and God bless.